The real aftermath didn't hit until weeks later, long after the servers had stabilized, long after the executives had been replaced, long after the Vibe Curator's neon-lit farewell video trended for a day and vanished into the algorithmic abyss. What remained was quieter, deeper, and far more interesting. Because once the panic died and the company regained its footing, people started telling the truth. Engineers I'd barely interacted with before showed up at my office door, not with complaints, but with gratitude. For the first time, one said, "Leadership actually listens." Another added, "We used to build workarounds behind management's back. Now we build systems." These weren't dramatic victories. These were the small, subtle corrections that slowly rebuild a broken culture, not applause, not headlines, not revenge, but alignment. Still, not everything transformed overnight. In the first leadership summit after the crisis, I sat across from directors who had once cheered for my removal. Some avoided eye contact. Others tried too hard to be friendly. I didn't blame them. Fear makes people perform strange, embarrassing rituals of loyalty. But the chair opened the meeting with a sentence that settled the room instantly: "We are no longer a company that fires people for vibes." Soft laughter rippled through the room, but it carried relief, like an infection being drained. Later, during a break, the interim COO approached me. "You know," he said, "everyone's calling the blackout the Retina reckoning." I raised a brow. "Catchy. They think you planned it as revenge." I shook my head. "If I had, things would have been much worse." He swallowed. "That's oddly comforting." In truth, I hadn't planned any of it, not the lockout, not the downfall, not the return. The system behaved exactly as it was designed to behave: protect the company when leadership failed to protect itself. But people love myths more than mechanisms. By the end of the first quarter, performance metrics soared. Compliance violations dropped to 0. Turnover decreased. Productivity shot up. Servers held steady. And for the first time in years, innovation wasn't a buzzword, it was a voltage you could feel moving through the building. The board offered me the permanent title of Chief Systems Architect. A dangerous gesture. Titles imply ownership. Ownership creates ego. Ego corrupts structure. I declined. "I'll guide the systems," I said. "But I won't let the systems depend on me." And so I remained in the place where I belonged, not in an executive suite, not on a pedestal, but in the quiet architecture of the company's backbone, where logic rules over politics. Months later, during a campus walkthrough, a junior engineer stopped me by the vending machine. "You're the guy who locked the whole company with your eyeball, right?" I sighed. "That's one interpretation." "You're a legend," he grinned. "Like a cybersecurity John Wick." I shook my head, but I didn't correct him. Myths had their uses. That night, I returned once more to the server room, my sanctuary, my responsibility, my legacy. The biometric scanner glowed faintly, cycling through its updated authentication sequence. It no longer relied on me alone. That was the point. I pressed my palm to the backup panel, not out of necessity, but out of habit. Green light. Access granted. Not because I was irreplaceable, but because I was still welcome. And in the soft mechanical heartbeat of the servers, I felt it: revenge wasn't the victory. Restoration was. Redesign was. Reclaiming the future without repeating the past, that was the real triumph. They replaced me with a Vibe Curator. But in the end, I didn't punish them. I simply reminded them what happens when you remove the architect and leave the foundation in the hands of people who can't tell a power cable from a ring light. The company survived. Because I came back not to settle scores, but to rebuild the blueprint they never understood. But survival was only the beginning. The deeper change, the one nobody expected, the one no report could quantify, unfolded slowly, almost invisibly, like a dormant system rebooting after a long outage. The board, chastened by the humiliation of losing control to a biometric lockout, finally recognized a truth I had been quietly pointing to for years. The company did not need more personality hires, more culture influencers, more people who curated moods like playlists. It needed architects, maintainers, operators, people who understood that stability wasn't an aesthetic, it was an obligation. And once that realization took hold, everyone shifted. Departments that once fought for visibility now competed for efficiency. Engineering teams requested audits instead of avoiding them. Product managers stopped chasing viral features and started chasing structural integrity. Even HR, long the keeper of corporate illusions, rewrote half its policies in less than 2 months. But the biggest change came the day the new CEO called me into her office. She wasn't one of the old guard. She'd been hired during the fallout, sharp, pragmatic, and utterly uninterested in corporate theatrics. Her office was minimalist. No inspirational posters. No ego-driven decor. Just a desk, a laptop, and a potted plant that looked like it could outlive the building. "I want to talk about the lockout," she said without preamble. I resisted the urge to sigh. It wasn't intentional sabotage. It was, "Oh, I know," she interrupted. "We've read the logs. Anyone with half a brain knows you were the one trying to keep the system stable, not break it." She folded her hands. "But tell me something, if you hadn't returned, how long would it have taken us to recover?" I answered honestly. "Months. Possibly a year." She nodded, absorbing the weight of that. "And if the former leadership had still been in place?" I hesitated. "The company would have collapsed." She leaned back. "That's what I thought." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, "I want you to design something new. Define something. A system," she said. "Not a server system. A human system. One that prevents leadership failure from endangering the company ever again." I stared at her. "You want me to architect governance?" "Yes," she said. "No silos. No emperors. No personality cults. Just resilience." It was the kind of request that would have been shot down instantly in the previous regime. They preferred chaos. Confusion made poor leaders feel powerful. But now the company wanted discipline. And I could work with discipline. So I did. I spent the next 6 weeks drafting what I called the redundancy protocols, a governance framework built like a fail-safe machine. No single executive could override critical systems. No department could operate without transparency. Every major decision required technical validation. Authority wasn't removed, it was distributed. When I presented it to the board, the room was startlingly silent. Then the CEO said, "Implement it." Just like that. No resistance. No power struggle. No hidden agenda. They learned. Months later, when the new protocol launched, an engineer sent me a message: "You didn't just rebuild the company, you debugged the entire organism." I didn't respond. Not because I disagreed, but because I understood something deeper. Revenge hadn't been the goal. Revenge had simply been the catalyst. The lockout woke them up. The aftermath taught them to stay awake. And me? I remained where I belonged, in the quiet corridors behind the code, where no one could replace me with a mood board or a ring light, because the system no longer allowed such foolishness. The company would outlive all of us now. Not because of my Retina, but because of the blueprint. 3 months after the redundancy protocols went live, the company hit its first real crisis under the new regime. A supplier collapsed, a security vendor went bankrupt, and a major client attempted to renegotiate all contracts overnight. In the old days, this would have sent executives into panic, triggered a wildfire of emails, late-night emergency meetings, and desperate half-solutions that created more chaos than clarity. This time, the system responded before leadership even fully understood the threat. Automated risk flags, department cross-checks, instant escalation to the appropriate teams. No bottlenecks. No power games. No decisions based on ego. Just order, clean, functional, elegant. The board issued a formal statement later that week. For the first time in our company's history, nothing broke. People celebrated. The CEO sent out a message recognizing the architect behind the architecture, a phrase that made the new interns whisper like they were hearing a ghost story. But me? I just watched from the background, unseen but fully present, knowing that the company was now safer from the very flaws that once destroyed it. And as I left the office that night, passing the new no aesthetic roles without technical approval policy taped to HR's door, I realized something. They hadn't just replaced the old system. They had evolved beyond it. My revenge had never been about shutting doors or proving points. It was about forcing a broken machine to see its cracks. And once it saw them, it rebuilt itself stronger than any one person. Even me. So I walked out of the building, not as a ghost, not as a forgotten relic, not as the legacy they once tried to discard, but as the quiet engineer whose work would stand long after his name faded from the employee directory. Some victories don't roar. They replaced me with a vibe curator. That was the actual title. Printed on a glossy badge, handed to a 23-year-old whose prior experience consisted of running a pastel-themed Instagram page and arranging plants for hotel lobbies. And she was now, according to our CEO, the future of workplace culture. I had been the lead systems architect for 11 years. I built the infrastructure, rewrote the legacy codebase, and designed the biometric vault that protected the company's sensitive financial data. But apparently, none of that mattered as long as the new hire brought creative sunlight to the workspace. That was the exact phrase used. When I pushed back, HR told me I needed to respect the new direction. The next morning at 9:03 a.m., I was fired. The vibe curator took my office. They did not, however, take the time to understand the one thing that had kept this entire company breathing, my retina. They escorted me out with the same clipboard politeness usually reserved for expired contractors. No exit interview. No knowledge transfer. No request for system deactivation procedures. The junior IT staff looked pale as they followed the HR director out of the server room, clearly unaware that they were about to inherit a kingdom whose gates only opened for me. And like any kingdom left without its architect, it would collapse the moment someone pulled the wrong lever. Ironically, that lever was already being pulled by the vibe curator, posting her first workspace glow-up video on the company's internal platform, rearranging desks, covering sensors with stickers, and unplugging random devices because they ruin the aesthetic. One of those devices? A backup identity node reader. The only one not tied to my retinal imprint. I didn't plan revenge. Not at first. I planned to leave, breathe, recover from the absurdity of being replaced by a girl who said slay in performance meetings. But 3 hours after my termination, I received an email, sent by accident, from the CFO. We can activate the migration once he's gone. No one else knows how the Deepgate cluster was set up. Once he's out, we take full control. It clicked. They had fired me not for being outdated, but because they were planning to strip out proprietary code, my code, into a new offshore entity the CEO's family secretly owned. They didn't want me noticing. They wanted me silent. Unfortunately for them, they'd forgotten that the Deepgate cluster had a built-in safeguard I designed years ago, a single-point biometric lock bound to my retina. Its intended purpose was to prevent unauthorized replication during audits. But today, it was going to serve a different purpose. The next morning, at 7:14 a.m., I received a flurry of panicked calls, first from junior IT, then from HR, then from the CEO himself. Something was wrong with all enterprise systems. Terminals wouldn't boot. Servers weren't responding. Internal networks were frozen in a loop asking for a master biometric. Their shiny new Vibe Curator tried burning sage in the server room, apparently convinced the machines were rejecting the new energy. The CFO tried rebooting the core cluster manually, which only triggered the security protocol further, locking the financial system behind an unbreakable chain. Every failed attempt increased the delay. By attempt 12, delay time had reached 36 hours. By attempt 20, 72. They were trapped in a digital coffin, one they had confidently marched into without me. When the CEO finally reached me, his voice shook with desperation. "We need your Retina scan to unlock the system." We didn't know it was bound to you." "Yes," I replied calmly. "That's why you don't fire the person who built the damn infrastructure." "We can offer compensation," he said quickly. "Your salary back. A consulting fee. Just come in." I laughed. "You replaced me with someone whose first initiative was putting glitter stickers on motion sensors." News spread fast, investors demanding explanations, clients threatening breach litigation, compliance teams circling like sharks. The system would remain locked until the authentication window expired and rebooted automatically, but I knew exactly how long that would take: 9 days. The company couldn't survive 9 hours, let alone days. They had one remaining option: request emergency federal cyber oversight. But doing so would require submitting documentation, including records of the offshore replication scheme they thought I didn't know about. They didn't call the authorities. They couldn't. And so the company collapsed into itself, dragged down by the same arrogance that made them trade an engineer for an aesthetic consultant. Within a week, the board forced the CEO and CFO out. HR leadership resigned. The Vibe Curator left a tearful goodbye message on the internal feed, assuming anyone could see it. Spoiler, they couldn't, because internal feeds were still locked. 2 weeks later, the new interim board contacted me with a tone opposite of arrogance: humility. They didn't ask me to return. They offered. "Name your terms," they said. I named them. Advisory only. Triple previous salary. Full autonomy. And no more creative sunlight initiatives in the server room. When I walked back into the building, I passed the Vibe Curator's abandoned desk, still decorated with pastel desk plants and a neon sign that said "Good Vibes Only." Ironically, the system unlocked the moment I blinked into the scanner. For the first time, it felt good. The company was running again, because I decided to let it. And that's when it hit me: they fired me thinking I was obsolete. But the truth was simpler: I wasn't outdated. I was the foundation they never understood. The silence that washed over the server room after the system finally unlocked wasn't peaceful, it was reverent. Every executive, every board member, every trembling IT analyst watched as the green indicator blinked alive on the Deepgate cluster for the first time in 13 days. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I didn't say "I told you so," even though the words sat perfectly on the edge of my tongue. All I did was adjust the calibration panel, reset the authentication queue, and reconfigure the biometric permissions so no single human, myself included, would ever hold that much power again. Ironically, the very safeguard that saved the company was the one they tried to rip out of my hands. The board waited until the last progress bar cleared before speaking. "Can you restore everything?" one member asked hesitantly. "It was never gone," I replied. "Just locked." They looked at one another, a silent blend of shame and relief swirling across their faces. They hadn't lost the data. They had lost control, and control was all they ever valued more than the people who built the foundation that allowed them to pretend they were visionaries. After I finished stabilizing the system, the interim chair motioned for me to follow her into what used to be the CEO's office. Everything had been stripped, the art pieces removed, the ridiculous innovation shrine dismantled, the marble desk cleared of ego and excess. "We owe you an apology," she said, standing with hands clasped like someone delivering a confession at an altar. "And more than that, we owe you restitution." I didn't respond. Apologies meant little from a system that punished competence and rewarded charisma. So she continued. "We've removed everyone involved in your termination. The offshore scheme. The fraud attempts. All of it will be submitted to regulators, voluntarily." She exhaled slowly. "We want you to oversee the rebuild. Not as an employee. As architect-in-chief. Answer only to the board. No interference." It was the first time anyone at that level had said the word architect with respect instead of condescension. I accepted, not because I wanted revenge, not because I needed validation, but because it meant ensuring no one else would ever be dismissed for the crime of being irreplaceable. The next few months transformed the company. Departments reorganized. Technical teams gained authority. The culture shifted from curated vibes to structural competence. My influence spread not through power, but through clarity, systems designed to prevent human arrogance from toppling foundations, security protocols that required multiple signatures, decision-making that relied on data, not mood boards or neon signs. And yet, every now and then, someone would ask me the same question: what happened to the vibe curator? She wasn't fired. She wasn't scapegoated. In truth, she asked to leave before anyone could ask her to stay. The day the company went dark, she sent a final message to the internal channel, before the system rejected it like a mismatched puzzle piece, saying she was returning to the world where she belonged, a world that appreciated her aesthetic sensibilities more than machines that didn't vibe with her energy. She became a lifestyle influencer. From what I hear, she's doing fine. Better than fine. And that's good. She never meant harm. She was simply a symbol of something far more dangerous, a leadership team that believed culture could replace competence. Ironically, she taught them a lesson without ever knowing it. As for the CEO, his fall was quieter. After resigning, he tried to claim he was misled by his own staff. But when evidence of the offshore scheme surfaced, there was no recovery for him. The CFO faced audits, investigations, and litigation that would trail him for years. And the board, now wiser, now humbler, built safeguards not just for servers, but for people. One evening, months after the dust settled, I stood alone in the server room. The hum of processors felt familiar, almost comforting, like returning to an old home after a long exile. A biometric scanner glowed softly on the wall. My Retina no longer ruled it, the system was multi-authenticated now. But still, it blinked green when it saw me. A gentle recognition. Not dominance, just belonging. I didn't destroy the company. I didn't even punish it. I simply let them experience life without the foundation they never respected. And when I returned, I didn't reclaim power. I rewrote the rules so no one could ever be discarded for a vibe again. In the end, they taught me a lesson too. Being replaced isn't an insult when the replacement proves the irreplaceable part was you.